Good vibrations.
So today I'm chatting with the proprietor of Sheep Farm Studios on YouTube and the creator of the Meet the Flockers series. It's Dom Waterson alongside his brother and sidekick Christian. Welcome along, guys.
Welcome, Matt.
Thanks for inviting us.
Now, it's just a guess, but do I find you in West Yorkshire?
You find me in West Yorkshire.
Cambridge.
Yeah, Christian's down south.
Oh, right, okay. No Cambridge accent there.
No. I've been gone 20 years and I've still got the same accent.
Have you? It's a wild stab in the dark, but I would have gone with West Yorkshire if I had to guess.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, you are right. Yeah, Huddersfield.
Right, cool. Oh, right, okay. So, I recently got put onto your Meet the Flockers series, and I found it totally fascinating. And you've done some great work there, some very thorough research. So I reached out to you to get you on the show because you've really delved into the backgrounds of these abominations. I don't even want to call them people. Johnson, Hancock, Whitty, and their like. And you've gone into some of their backgrounds, some of their affiliations, and really, spilt the beans on what these individuals are all about. So I commend you on that. First of all, how long have you been on the truth train of this kind of alternative research, both of you?
Do you want to start, Chris?
Yeah, well, we've both been on it quite a while, to be honest, in a very weird way. Like I said, I moved away when I was quite young, in my 20s. And what was strange was I was living down south, my brother was living up north. And we used to talk, but not really about any of this stuff. And then one day I went home and saw my mum, and I was banging on to my mum about stuff, and she went, "Do you speak to Dominic a lot?" I said, yeah, I speak every now and again. Because he talks about exactly the same stuff as you. So even though we were 200 or 300 miles away, we were still talking the same thing and looking into the same stuff, just on a slightly different angle, I think, weren't we, Dom?
Yeah.
And then Dom started doing the sheep farm thing. He's a bit more proactive than I am, to be honest. And then we just felt like we had to do something. And Dom's been doing this for a year. How long have you been doing it, Dom? The sheep farm?
About a year, 18 months, something like that, yeah.
Yeah, and then it just built up into the film thing. And he kind of dragged me kicking and screaming into that first one. But now we've got quite into it, quite enjoying it.
So it's not the case that the scamdemic woke you up then? You were kind of on this path before that?
Oh yeah, quite a long time, yeah.
Yeah, there were a few things happened to us when we were quite young, actually, as well. I mean, I started reading JFK books when I were about 17, 18, something like that, in the late 80s. I remember watching it was like a mock-up of the Lee Harvey Oswald court case as it might have happened, which it wouldn't have happened that way because it was on Channel 4. But at that point, it fascinated me. And so I bought some alternative books, not knowing what I were even buying. And that fascinated me. And I learned about MK Ultra and COINTELPRO and things like that at quite an early age. So I was questioning things quite early on. Although I hadn't jumped ship totally at that point. I think 9/11 were my jumping over the fence fully. Moment.
And again, Dom, just to interrupt, sorry. When we were kids, he was looking at JFK quite a lot. I was more into like mystical and aliens and things like that. Where these things meet on a level, but we're looking at the same things just from a different angle, if you like.
I don't know if you want to go into it, Chris, but you had a strange thing happen to you when you were a kid, and you don't like talking about it, Mark. So you might be privileged.
No, I don't.
You don't like talking about it, so you're going to ask him to.
Yeah, on air.
in a pure older brother style way. But no, I'm not bothered about talking about it. When I was a kid, I saw a UFO. We were brought up on a farm, small holding, and I saw it down the back of the woods where we used to go as kids sledging. And I think it must have been 11 or 12. And it was quite a big one as well, by the way. But when I told anybody, nobody believed me. And I just found it a bit ridiculous that I'd seen this thing, experienced this thing, and I just got laughed at. It was ridiculous. I think from then I decided I didn't care. And as I got older, I didn't mind telling people and letting them laugh at me, but I don't care anymore. But it happened, and that's it. As far as I'm concerned.
Well, I mean, you should hear the full story, really, because the full story was he was with his friends. They pulled the sledges up to the top of the hill where we used to sledge, and the next thing they knew, the sledges were at the bottom, and they were still at the top, laid down in the snow. That's the full sort of short and full story.
Well, they'd lost time.
They'd lost time, yeah, and none of his friends remembered it, and they didn't want to talk about it.
I've always wondered whether the UFO phenomenon is all down to secret government technology and mind control programs and things like this. in the absence of any other explanation, because the whole thing about UFOs is right there in the name. They are unidentified.
Yes.
Yeah, I've often suspected that it's down to, nefarious government activity and technology that we don't know about and stuff. I might
Other
be
than
wrong.
little green men. Yeah, I agree.
When I was younger, I went down the alien road. I think as I got older, I started to think the same thing, to be fair, Matt. I'm not convinced of going into space anymore.
On another note, Christian is an artist, and he started making these sculptures of really strange things, which freaked me out a little bit. And so he's a good painter and things like that. And so, yeah, you should see some of his stuff that he's done.
Like what Richard Dreyfuss did with his mashed potato in Close Encounters. He was getting those strange insights.
Yeah. So there are a lot of things happening. Sorry,
the point was, though, Dom, that there's a truth out there. There's something out there, wherever it is, but nobody wanted to talk to me about it, and I just found it a bit frustrating. So I think that opened up a thing in my mind where, adults didn't have all the answers and were lied to quite a lot. I think a series of situations, the Iraq War, other things. I think with the 9/11 thing, I went more down the Michael Moore road to start with, and then realised that were all nonsense. So it's just been an opening book like that kind of thing, I think. I've heard you talk about it, Mark. I think a very similar path in a kind of a way.
That sounds like some pretty good grounding for what you're doing now as well. So what inspired you to start putting these films together, Meet the Flockers then? I mean, was there a singular trigger for that, or was it just a spontaneous idea?
It's a bit spontaneous, really. I'd done a series of 7 films called Shut the Flock Up, and that was about mind control, where I started from, really, the sort of position I came from. Knowing we were all controlled in some way, shape or form, whether it's through finance or through pharmaceuticals or whatever it might be. And so I sort of got that out of my head, if you like. And then I thought, right, what we're going to do next? And obviously this came about. So the main culprits from our country, I thought, well, let's have a deep dig. And when I started digging deep into like Hancock, I thought, that can't be right. The information there was huge. And when you see it all together, it's quite blatantly obvious that it's not what we've been told. And he's on a path to, he's just been greased all the way through. And then you look at Whitty, and it's the same thing. And Boris Johnson, I never thought there was that much information about one person, to be honest with you. And the links he's got into other things, it's unbelievable.
We just did another part of it yesterday, Mark, and it's just getting bigger and bigger, isn't it, Don?
Yeah.
We could go on forever.
We don't want to go down the Mike Williams route and get into that PID stuff forever. But certainly we're going to do another one after this next one. There's going to be 4 Boris ones.
You're going to be those Meet the Flockers guys, aren't you? That tag is just going to stick with you.
Yeah.
Do you get the feeling that these candidates, having taken a deep dive into their backgrounds and their affiliations, Johnson, Hancock, Whitty, and whoever else you've done, I'll ask you about who the others have been. Do you get the feeling that these individuals were shuffled into position ready for the scamdemic because they were the chosen ones? They were the ones that the architects of this narrative wanted in place, ready to push all these agendas through, because they could be trusted to stick to the script, and they were the ones that were down with the program. Did you get that impression at all along the way?
If you look at Hancock, if you look at one of them SS guys, the worst of the worst, if you like. I know the Second World War's got different connotations to me now, but the ones that came from Romania generally were the ones that were worse because they wanted to prove themselves to the hierarchy of the Nazi party. And he reminds me of one of those, where he's got something to sort of prove to someone. He's been given a job, whether it's by Bill Gates or a controller behind them. He's looking at proving this. He seems to be enjoying himself. Whereas Whitty looks like he's, I don't know, they've got something against him.
Under duress.
Yes, yeah. And Boris Johnson, I think, thought he were going to rule Britain and he were going to get us do the Brexit thing, and everyone were going to be everybody's hero. And then he's had this thrown in his lap.
You see, he seems like Boris Johnson. He seems like a spoiled prince to me. He's been handed everything, parted his way up to the top, and just gets away with anything he wants. Hancock. He seems like he's trying to show it. He's enjoying it. He's trying to impress some in-laws or something.
Yeah, Hancock, you've made the point in your videos that he seems to be trying to impress his in-laws through his marriage into the nobility, the peerage, whatever. It's like he's the son-in-law that's trying to prove himself to the family. And that's why he's trying so hard. And he seems to be relishing every moment. of the three, Johnson, Hancock, and Whitty, Hancock seems to be enjoying himself the most. He's loving every moment.
Yeah, I would say that as well. He's loving his way up there, his climb up to the top, if you like. This is his power moment. Whereas Johnson, although he's been bred and the cards have been shuffled, I think you mentioned that when Astor Cameron stepped away and May took over, he was the prime candidate for that job. And he stepped away, pulled out, didn't he? And
was told to.
I was told to. And I mean, we come on to it a little bit in the next film where it seems strange that at that particular point, a lot of things changed in his life. Like it was going, I don't know if you've seen recently in the papers, he was having an affair with an American woman called Arcuri. And she now has returned into the papers, coming out with the affair that they had. Why now? Why would they bring that out? Maybe she was promised the role that Carrie got. And when you see it all together, you'll understand what we're talking about, really, because she's not a happy woman. Is she, Chris?
Yeah. I mean, the amount of affairs and lying and how we got to. I mean, some of this we've done more of the lying stuff in the last one we did yesterday. But it just amazes you that this man can be running the country and telling us all to stay in his houses.
How's he brought so many women? That's what
I don't know.
Maybe we don't want to know.
Well, that's got to be another question, hasn't it? Because, I mean, he's not the Lothario-looking chap you expect.
Not the handsomest chap in the world, is he? Not by my books.
No. And apparently he gets these women because of his fun and his humour and all this type of stuff. And I think that only goes so far, surely.
Well, with the women I've met, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And, but I think, I don't know, the Carrie one, to me, there's quite a lot of satanic stuff there, in my view.
She's a dark one, isn't she?
Very dark one. And some of the things that she's done, it surprises me that she's actually there. The people that are behind her, her family, her father owned a major newspaper. I think it was the Independent. Yeah, it was Independent. He was the founder of the Independent newspaper, and he sold it to two Russians. One was an ex-KGB guy, an underbank in Russia, an oligarch, and he's quite a mover and shaker. He now works for it's like an arms advisor for countries, and yet she's in number 10, and her brother works with him at this arms advisor, which we're going to come on to in this next one. And you look at this, how are they allowed in number, they've got a direct route into number 10. And he also works for Larry Ellison, these connections that are in there. And the Larry Ellison campaign now he's closed his foundation down and he's concentrating on a call to arms for the COVID philanthropy.
The style of research you've done there, it puts me in mind of what Dave McGowan did with his book Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon, where he took musicians that we're all familiar with from the 60s, from that counterculture era. We all know the names, but nobody had ever gone digging into their family backgrounds, their affiliations, their links and connections, and pieced it all together like a jigsaw puzzle before. And it's amazing what you find when you do. And McGowan only used mainstream sources, and I know that's what you do as well.
Yeah.
In your citations, you just use mainstream sources. It's a great approach because it instantly fends off any accusations of conspiracy theory. And it's incredible what's right there in the public domain for all to see, but it only really starts to take shape and make sense when you bring it all together and aggregate it the way you have.
No, I was going to say I've read McGowan's books as well, and your own actually, man. But the thing is, we get most of it from Googling newspaper fronts and Wikipedia, things like that. So there's never a question that we're making anything up. I think that's the rule that we've got in it, Don.
Yeah, it is. Yeah,
we even try and avoid putting his own opinion in too much, but we've kind of started to bleed in a little bit, I think, in the last couple.
Yeah, I mean, also some of these rabbit holes you go down. Last night before we started recording, I was waiting for Chris to come on as usual, and I started digging around at brothers. I thought she got some brothers, and then I realised he worked for this arms consultancy company, and then you start getting into their background, and it's a simple process, really. It's not something nobody could do. We're not doing anything really, really clever, but you just got to go where the sort of trail leads you, and wherever it leads you, the answers just appear in front of you. And it's quite blatantly obvious. When Boris Johnson's negotiating how much he's going to spend on the armed forces, and then his girlfriend or his wife's father works for a massive arms consultancy, you don't have to add much together to realise where the money's going, do you?
Exactly. Yeah. So your videos, by their very nature, will be viewed mainly by existing truthers, I guess, people that are already on the path. But there sure would be a lot of value in hordes of normies seeing them. If only we could find a way of achieving that. You know, maybe kidnapping them and forcing their eyes open, like Malcolm McDowell in A Clockwork Orange, just forcing them to look at this stuff. But yeah, I mean, you know, if you could only get normies to look at the connections these people have got and how they're compromised by deals going on behind the scenes and all this stuff, it would really paint them in a different light, wouldn't it?
Yeah, but they've got to jump, as us three know, and the people probably listening to your show, to get to that point, you've got to accept that the government is a facade and it's not what it seems. And that's the difficult part for people who've had 20, 30, 40 years of indoctrination into the brains. That the country is what they're being told it is. And everything that the government do is for your best interests. Only when you realise that probably nothing of what they do is for your best interests can you move to that point. And even as simple as the process that we do is, you know, they've got to flick that switch, haven't they? Take that pill, if you like. And when you explain to people, I was having a conversation with Christian on the last one about how is it that we can see things and the others can't, and whether it's 1% of us or 2%. There's a very small amount of people who can see these things. And I'm not saying we can see everything, but we can certainly see things that others can't. Why is that? What is the reasoning behind that? I mean, I know it's a deeper question really to talk about the films, but that's the reason why people can't see what's going on, isn't it? And if you think about the amount of effort that the government goes into to contain 1 or 2% of the population like us, it's huge, isn't it? They've got the 90-odd% of population fighting against us and the armory of all the mind control stuff as well.
I saw a great meme the other day, which the wording was, if the situation was hopeless, they wouldn't bother with all the propaganda. And you got pictures of all these TV screens and the BBC logo and all this. So they do feel the need to keep the propaganda and the fear-based mind control stepped up at all times.
He's ramped up to 12 on the radio and TV now, Mark. It's just unbelievable. It's never ending. It's just a constant vaccination sales pitch, isn't it?
And all roads have led to the vaccination agenda now. It's become clear what the scamdemic was all about, because it was always intended to get us to this point where the vaccines get pushed on everyone. Have you found in your research that pretty much all roads lead to Bill Gates when you've looked into these people? Or have you actually uncovered individuals who don't have any connections to Bill Gates?
I think it's deeper than that. I mean, I'm from a business background. I started a company up in Huddersfield. We were in technology right in the early days, selling mobile phones in 1990. We were the enemy now. But anyway, that was back then. And so my mindset goes in that some people are more technical. I'm more, I don't know what you want to call it, business-like. So I look at things and think, what opportunities are there for people to gain out of this? And when I say that to people, they say, well, they can't gain. They've collapsed the economy. And what people don't understand is that the world economy, the people that own money don't need money. Only we need money. And so they can print as much as they want, and it doesn't matter to them because they own everything. They get everything for free. So the way they gain is by jabbing us or mind controlling us, but for what end? And what people generally do is they jump from what's happening to why and who's doing it and why they're doing it. And that's why they can't get past first base. And that takes a lot of doing, doesn't it? And going back to what you were originally saying, who's behind it all? The people that control the money, they're behind it all. And I don't believe Bill Gates is behind it all. He's a stopgap of he's the voice. It reminds me of that guy off one of the James Bond films who was fronting it all up. He was at the opera and they were all talking to him on those microphones. He's that guy that's flying around the world convincing leaders to do what they're doing, really. Because he can't take over the world with $100 billion. He just can't. It's impossible. And he can't get access to all that cash anywhere because it's all held up in stocks. So
You hear it said that if you've heard somebody's name and they've got a public profile, they're not at the top of the tree. They're not really controlling things because you've heard of them. Because the real controllers keep themselves hidden and nobody really knows their names. That's where the real power is.
Yeah, you have to come back to that Committee of 300 type of idea. I'm not saying it's 300 people or families, but it's that type of idea where there are probably different groups vying for control at different times, working together like corporates do, and for their own interests. It just makes perfect sense, does that? Because that's what humans are like, if they are human. But the human nature is that they've bred us all to be competitive. I don't think we are competitive if we're in a normal situation. We're just being bred that way through fear. And fear drives everything we do, which comes back to that Monsters, Inc. type of theory, doesn't it? Where they're draining us of energy for some reason, because the overriding factor is that everybody's running around terrified, even before this, suffering from anxiety and things like that. Why does everybody need to be on DEFCON 5 all the time?
If you take fear out of it, it doesn't exist, does it? She's gone instantly.
Exactly, yeah.
And what we're scared of not living for an extra 10, 20 years. That's what all this is about, really.
I think I heard Crow once say, and we watch Crow quite a lot, we've heard you on his shows, their show, Jason's show, and he says, somebody somewhere knows what happens after we leave here. And it could be over in one sentence, couldn't it? Just by telling everybody what happens. And they're not willing to do that. So they're willing to keep us all terrified, or attempt to keep us all terrified. There's some of us that aren't.
I think I was more scared of this right at the beginning, because when it first happened, I obviously said to myself, well, this is bollocks, it's not real. But the fear was, if they can do this, because I was still going to work as well, and there was not one car on the street. And my fear was, if they can do this, what else? What's coming next? What's possible? I mean, it wasn't any fear of any virus. It was just, what the hell are they going to do next? We're going to have drones flying around with guns on them. Anything's possible now, isn't it? Now the door's open.
I think it was a lot scary a year ago because it was so uncertain. We didn't know where this was all headed. Now we've had a year's worth of research and it's pretty clear where it's all headed. At least I feel so. It's much easier to head off now when you know what the game plan is. But back then it was very uncertain. And I don't know about you, but I've been researching this stuff for years, the hidden controllers of this world and the New World Order agenda and all of this. But even in spite of understanding how secret societies work and how these people organize themselves in these different groups and networks, I never imagined they would drop a stunt like they did on us all at once. I never saw it coming.
No.
Call me naive, but I just never imagined they would drop everything they've got on us all at once. Took me by surprise. Had a minute to get used to it now, but it really did knock me for six when it happened.
It did make you wonder, though, like people like ourselves who've been looking at the background of this stuff for years and years. Did we know something was coming? Did we have some inkling? Because it was like my friend asked, what's it all about? Because I was going on about my things. And I couldn't really answer him, if you know what I mean. But then when this happened, it all became a lot clearer. This is what we've been talking about, but why were we talking about it before it happened? Was there a feeling? Was it some kind of eye-opening thing happened? But it seems like a small percentage of people, like Don was saying, saw it coming but couldn't really put it into words.
Yeah, I think the answer to that lies in spiritual and metaphysical realms, to be honest.
Yeah, definitely.
I would agree. Yeah. I would agree, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we were looking into health side of it because I do a lot of research on health. Me and my wife have got Lyme disease, so we started treating ourselves in the 2000s, the back end of the 2000s, with natural remedies, and fortunately, it held a lot of the symptoms off. And so people started asking us how we were getting better. Anyway, the culmination of it is we ended up opening a clinic with nurses working for us. So the health thing is at the forefront of my life every single day, to be quite fair. In fact, if you'd turn your camera on and look behind me, you'd see we've got a small clinic down underneath the house that over the years I've collected equipment and things like that. So as far as the virus goes, I was sticking tools up at a virus because I've got Lyme disease. I'll swap you every day for a cold.
Same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So just going back to the flockers then, so who have you done? I know you've done Johnson, Hancock and Whitty, but who else have you done so far?
Well, within Whitty, we did Valance. He was mentioned in there as well. He's another one who's, all these people are just linked back to pharmaceutical companies, big corporates, NGOs. They're all got ties into all of them, just like the World Health Organization has. I mean, they've got the head of a guy, the guy at the head, I forget his name now. He's the Ethiopian guy. They're wanting on war war crimes. You know, they're trying to get him back into to face war crimes. So these are the type of people you're dealing with. These people have got no scruples. They're just not like us. They're either possessed or they're following a path because they're being forced to. There's some kind of control over them that, and I've seen it in business people that I've met that have got, I mean, we were quite successful from a financial aspect, but not like the big businessmen. We were a small business, you know, a mum and dad business, and we could earn a living. These guys, you see it in their eyes, they just stare right through you. And it's strange carry on where you're having a conversation 1 minute with them and then they're gone. And it is like they're being possessed. And I find that a lot of these people, when you're doing the research on them, they drain you of energy. It leaches out, doesn't it, Chris?
Yeah.
And you're drained afterwards. And their lives are so negative, and there's no love in their lives. That's one thing we find, where as everyday people, we have as families around us, which is exactly what they've split us up, haven't they?
Well, like the first Johnson one done, where all the kids were taken to boarding school, 8 years old. So, I mean, I'm not saying I feel sorry for Johnson, but they're brought up with no affection in their lives, and the dad just seems like a total bully as well. So I mean, you could sympathise, but not to be. Is that how they're all brought up? Is that why they've got no empathy for anybody?
I don't know if you came across this anecdote in your research about Johnson, but I remember reading somewhere it was like a nanny or somebody that worked for the family who said that Johnson was told from a very young age that one day he was going to be prime minister, because these things are pre-planned and it's written, you know, what path they're going to go down. And from a young child, she remembers him being told, one day, Boris, you will be prime minister, and here he is. Does that ring any bells at all, that story?
Yeah, he used to tell his sister that. He actually said, I'm going to be king of the world. And then he changed it to king of England. And that, when he was young, very young as well. And so from an early age, words have been put in his head or controlled or pushed that way.
One thing that was blatantly obvious, though, Dom, like we've talked, I can't remember if it's in the film, it's out now, about how he was getting positioned as well from early 2000s. I mean, me and Dom talked about it, years ago? I was
5 or 6 years ago,
and we were saying, what's going on with this Johnson guy? Is he getting lined up for prime minister, do you think? I remember us having that conversation. Yeah. And then when we looked into his background, he was used on TV, he was on EastEnders, Top Gear, and we were saying he by going on EastEnders, Top Gear, and what was he doing, Dom?
I've got news for you.
He's covering every demographic of the English populace, if you like. He's got the Top Gear guys, he's got EastEnders people, and then he's got people who think they're a bit smarter because they watch Have I Got News for You. And he's been put in your face, and he hadn't done anything at that point. But we've been told who this guy is.
Which other prime ministers had that run? Where he's made so many mistakes, he's lied. I mean, there's so many videos of him lying, it's unbelievable. Even none of the other prime ministers have got videos of themselves like that. We've unearthed loads of them. I'm sure there's loads more. And he's just got a clear path right to number 10. And any one of those would have finished any one person.
That's right. You posted a video, which I saw on your channel today. Pathological liar Boris Johnson shows he can do no wrong. And he's on the Andrew Marr show, presumably, seemingly, although it's not Andrew Marr interviewing him, it's somebody else. An examiner of body language would have a field day with it because he keeps touching his face and nervously moving his hands around his body. And the interviewer says at one point, you're a nasty piece of work, aren't you? which is brilliant, putting him on the spot like that. And he's going into how he used to lie when he was a newspaper journalist, just blatantly publish lies. And he's calling him out on it and saying, why did you do it? And he won't answer the question. He doesn't give a straight answer, as none of them ever do. And he's bumbling his way around it and just wanting to change the subject and looking very nervous, shuffling around on his seat. That's a great video, very revealing.
He literally says, can we talk about something else? Why no one wants to talk about this? Can we talk about something else?
Exactly.
We found another couple of videos, one of them sent in by a couple of people to us. As you know, you'll get a load of emails as well now, we do. And they sent us a video of me being questioned about child abuse. And they're saying, you said that we were, I think the word he used was spaffing money up the wall looking into... What were it, Chris? Historic abuse.
Historic abuse, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's just that yesterday.
Yeah, he said, I never said that. Anyway, there's another video of him actually saying it on LBC. And he actually said the words, we're spaffing 60 million a year up looking at historic child abuse.
And the fact that he calls it historic, so nobody looks into it, he's talking like it's 200 years ago when it's 10, 20 years ago.
But then when you look at his life at Ashbourne, where him and his sister were the first girl to go there, funnily enough, but he said that the corporal punishment there was terrible. And so he's had that abuse from being whatever 6-year-old, being left there. His mum went, poor woman went mad and she had to go to an asylum. So they were brought up by that nanny that you were mentioning, the chain-smoking nanny with a raspy voice from, again, the Norland Nursing College, which is a royal nursing college that use the big prams like in Rosemary's Baby. Yeah, a standard.
Yeah.
You can't make this stuff up if you wanted to.
Yeah. So he's a pathological liar and he's a eugenicist. So
Yes.
what could possibly go wrong with him as Prime Minister?
Exactly.
He's the man for the
Trust me,
job.
I'm your doctor. Trust me, I'm your doctor.
Yeah. And it just makes me think they wanted Boris Johnson to be in place for the scamdemic. I think Cameron probably would have done, but, he got in too early. They didn't want Theresa May, so they shuffled her out the way, put Johnson in. That election, there was a general election in December 2019. Right. Elections never take place in December. They're always in the spring, but that one was in December, just a few months before the COVID scamdemic just happens to break, and he's in office for it. So all planned.
It's a dictatorship now, isn't it? That's we're living under what people, apart from your listeners, don't understand is that our government has declared war on its own population. It's not firing guns or bombs. It's declared war. That's right. And a mental war it might be, but now it's a physical war because they're sticking things in you.
Spiritual war as well.
A spiritual war, yes. Definitely a spiritual war. War of consciousness. I've got a friend, I think you know him actually, but he is a spiritual healer, and he says he's trying to heal people who've had this jab, and he can't get through to them. Even people who are into meditation and things like that, they can't get past. Something's gone. And
wish we knew what it was.
Yeah. Well, again, it's obviously DNA, mRNA changing technology. They're calling it technology. So technology to me is computers, but that's my rough version of it. But
well, there's people that took some of the early versions of these vaccines, and they're on record as saying they've removed God. They've removed, all the spirituality within me. It's like something in the vaccine has attacked that connectedness that we have, that holistic connection to creation and to everything else that's out there. And it's just, negated it so that you become an automaton, just cut off from everything around you.
But if you think about it from a lot of my research on my other website, healthbunker.co.uk, I do a lot of blogging on there. And a lot of the research from after, I'll use it after the Second World War. Something was cranked up after the Second World War from the number of chemicals that were around put into foods and things like that. The number of medications. Most people are on medications now. The drift away from natural product, the poisoning of the water, the air, the foods. These things have had genetic changes probably to get us to this point now. Like Boris Johnson, he was chosen for this point now because people have been lobotomized. They can't think straight. You see them, they can't think straight. And I'm not being awful to these people because we've been lobotomized. And I could talk about stuff with health that it could go into that realm about parasites and things like that. We do massive parasite shifts with people and the things that come out of these. And when these things go, their anxiety goes. Now, you can't tell me there's no link to mental illness and these things because I know there is, but and why are these things inside them? Well, they've been tested. They're found in vaccinations. They're found in foods, etc., etc. There's even a suicide parasite. Can you believe that? It gets inside a grasshopper, drowns it to get into a human. Gets into the water supply.
Have you seen these videos that are doing the rounds about these blue face masks and they're being put under a microscope and there's these moving bloody organisms, whatever they are, like stringy things, and they're like moving on their own, which is pretty
freaky,
concerning.
Yeah.
I haven't seen it.
It's a bit like the red wine thing, isn't it? When they're swilling it around the mouth and spit it out and all them things are moving around in the red wine. I don't know if you've seen that.
I did that, Dom. Yeah.
Yeah. and all the things are moving around. I mean, I could get into that. If you want to get into that side, I'll get into the parasite side. But the parasites, when we had Lyme disease, went to the NHS and they said you haven't got parasites here, the testing and all that type of stuff. Fine. And it was only when we started clearing these things out, and it took me nearly 3 years to get rid of these things. And I was suffering from some really bad symptoms with Lyme disease. And once these things left, it were like a cleansing process, an exorcism, like just all these living objects that come out your system that were controlling you.
We mentioned how Johnson was squirming around on his seat during that interview on the Andrew Marr show. And he was just avoiding any question that he didn't want to answer. And I've seen Hancock do this as well. Hancock was being asked if he regretted his actions in certain aspects of what he'd been doing. And the interviewer was after a simple yes or no. Do you regret your actions? And he asked him about 12 times, and Hancock would not answer the question. He was just being all oily and greasy and slippery and just trying to avoid it. Reminds me of Tony Blair, actually. I think he models himself
Don't mention
on
him.
Yeah, I think Blair is Hancock's hero because he sounds a lot like him.
Yeah, he delivers exactly the same, doesn't he?
Yeah. And I think it's a clear indication that politicians are trained in how not to answer a question. They must actually attend seminars where they're taught how to avoid a question that you don't want to answer, because they all do it, don't they?
Yeah. I think we discussed in the video, Dom, that if that was your friend who liked you that much, you wouldn't have any, or a family member, you wouldn't have anything to do with them. But for some reason, we let these guys run the world, or run the country. It doesn't make any sense to us at all.
No, well, the levels of treachery from all politicians, 600 and odd of them, you can't tell me that they can't see what's going on, even a small fraction of them, and they're not speaking out. They daren't speak out because of the jobs. Well, this is the job to speak out. Their job is to protect us. That's what they're there for, and they're not doing their job. And whether they think there's a mutant virus running around, it's not doing what they're telling us it's doing. That's the fact. That's clear.
Well, this is a good question, because a lot of people have asked me, do you think all 600 odd of these MPs know that it's a big scam, the COVID thing, or do you think any of them are actually buying it? Do you think they genuinely believe that there's a virus out there?
I always ask myself that same question. And also the media on TV, you listen to them and you think, do you actually know? Do you know? Or are you being complicit? Or are you stupid? Or do you totally believe everything?
Holly Willoughby, do you think she knows?
That's it. Yeah. I thought that when I watched that. I've seen her.
Maybe not Holly. Maybe not Holly.
Maybe Philip. Maybe not Holly.
Yeah. Philip gets quite angry sometimes about people not masking and all this.
What,
stuff.
in ripping a tissue sort of way?
Yeah. But I was saying to Dom earlier, Mark, was in 1984, Winston, the main protagonist in 1984. I've always thought that he's supposed to reflect us, and now I was thinking in a different way. We're not Winston. We're the pros, aren't we? Winston is maybe Philip Schofield, and he's in the party. He's doing what he's told, but he doesn't have the answers either.
He changes old news stories, doesn't he, and rewrites history?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking about. I've been thinking about this a lot for the last few days. His job is actually to drop history down the memory hole and rewrite it. That's his job. So you think, he's basically the 1984 version of the media operator. So, you know what I mean? These people are all in the party. We're not even in the party, are we? But are all these people who are on media and all these politicians, they're in the party. They know so much, but they don't know that much. And they're still getting tortured at the end of the day.
Piers Morgan's got to know, hasn't he?
yeah, that scumbag.
Have you done a show on Piers Morgan?
No, I started looking into him, and it was another rabbit hole. And it's he'd be a good. We wrote a list, and he's on the list, if you like, on the flocker list.
I mean, we weren't even going to do Boris Johnson, were we, Dom? I mean,
no, you talked me into it.
I said we've got to do it because we've got to do the trilogy. We've got to do all three of them because they're the ones who are on TV all the time.
The unholy trinity.
The unholy evil trinity. But they are the ones that everybody, you see those three faces talking about this all the time. But now it's kind of, I'm looking forward to getting off it and doing someone else because Boris Johnson's just stretched out into, he could go on forever, to be honest with you.
You've touched on Valence. Who else is in there?
Our friend, Professor Ferguson.
Oh, yeah, of course.
He's a nice character. I mean, when we start looking into him, I mean...
He's a big hit with the ladies as well, isn't he?
he's a big hit with the ladies, and he's a big hit doing data predictions.
Yeah.
he gets them all right. I mean, he got the first one right. I mean, we were right in the middle of that, weren't we, Chris? The cattle stuff, the BSE stuff.
BSE.
Because
Yeah.
our dad were a butcher, and he had a very small butcher shop, and we used to go and help him and go up to like slaughterhouse and things like that. Sorry for you vegans listening. And we were brought we were brought up with animals, just a few animals, sheep and what have you. And the government were buying sheep off farmers for way above the market price. Does that remind you of furloughing? It does to me. And then going and burning all the sheep on the mountains like some inferno across out the Pennines. It was a strange phenomenon at night when you saw all these burning carcasses being shipped there. And he was at the height of that. He was the one that predicted that what was going to happen when it didn't happen. And that was his start of his career, Ferguson.
So when he passes over and faces judgment, he's going to have several million angry sheep and cows that want to get him to answer for what he did.
Yeah. The cloven-footed warriors.
Exactly.
I should maybe mention that me and Dom looked into I think this was one phone call, so I'll mention it though, where we I can't remember what we found out, but we were looking into when they did the foot and mouth, and there was some interesting dates and things happened around that. I think we might look into it a bit further when I'm talking about it. But it were almost ritualistic, the culling of all those animals. We started to work out.
Yeah, and the dates were interesting. I can't remember for life of me now, but you think of the fire burning with, and it just reminds you of some sort of sacrifice, doesn't it?
Yeah,
on a mass scale.
Was it around the 20th of April by any remote chance?
And I think that's what we might have discovered. Like I said, it was just a phone call. We just had this very brief but as we were doing it, we were going, oh my God, wow, blooming heck. Jeez. Because
that's a date in the occult calendar that's associated with sacrifice by fire. So if it happened around the 20th of April, I would not be surprised.
Yeah. And it went on for X amount of time. I can't remember what it was off the top of my head. But it stinks of sacrifice. It's
a bit like, remember when the police were called out to Carrie's house before Johnson got into power? And there was an altercation there. I don't know if you remember, Mark. We're on the news. We've got it in the next one. We've got quite a big bit on it anyway in the next film. And that was on the 21st of the 6th. You can't even make this up, can you? Summer solstice.
Summer solstice. The date we get our freedoms back, apparently.
Yes, apparently. On the same day, they were having an argument that was recorded by a neighbour, fully recorded, which I've got to ask myself, that ain't a neighbour, that's a handler that's bugged her flat. She earned 80 grand a year and she has a £650,000 flat. How's that work?
And Johnson's birthday is the 19th of June, so it's just before the solstice.
That was one of the first things, I remember when this first kicked off, Matt, I remember one of the first things I looked at was the fact that it was called coronavirus and they started calling it COVID-19, coronavirus. They were using it in the same sentence.
Yeah.
Numerologically, one's 9 and one's 11. I can't remember which way around it is. But that was one of the first things we discussed when it was why they keep changing the name? They keep calling it coronavirus and then COVID-19. One of them's 9, one of them's 11. It's that simple.
Yeah. Then you've got SARS-CoV-2 just to confuse you as well. It's like what they started doing with ISIS. They called them ISIS in some news bulletins, IS in others, and Daesh in others.
Yeah. Well, the word ISIS comes up a lot. I mean, we mentioned it in the last one, didn't you? Tamises, you mentioned, Chris.
Actually, you're from Oxford, aren't you, Matt? He was
originally,
They call the River Thames there, the Isis River.
They do, yeah. It's the Thames, but as it flows through Oxford, it changes its name to the Isis.
Because we found that out because the Johnsons, when they wrote for the Oxford University magazine, the magazine's called Isis. So I looked into that and it was named after the river. I thought, that's a bit weird. And then the reason for it being called the Isis River, it didn't even make any sense. It was beyond ridiculous.
Yeah. Well, Oxford is one of the breeding grounds for these creatures, isn't it? As is Eton Public School. You find so many of them attended Eton. Yeah, Oxford and Cambridge, sometimes Sandhurst Military Academy. It's the same old institutions.
And that's the one thing that comes through, Mark, that all these people are going to these Oxbridge-type places, Eton, they're farmed off there as young kids to be indoctrinated by abusing teachers. It's just a strange... And parents just push them there. In fact, Chris has got a great story about Stanley's school which I'm going to spoil for the next film now, but it's a good story, isn't it, Chris? Stanley Johnson went to a school called Shearborn, which is about 1,000 years old. Anyway, I won't spoil it. Go on, Chris.
All right. The teacher there got done for touching up the kids, basically. And I looked at the evidence, and the evidence is pretty overwhelming. But what was interesting, just to cut a long story short, when he actually got done, all the parents rallied to try and save him. And then when he left, he got a standing ovation. They all sang for "He's a jolly good fella." But the evidence against him was overwhelming. For 20 years, this had gone on. I think he'd been there for 40 years, hadn't he, Don? But
yeah.
The people from the 70s up to the 90s had put in complaints about him. They'd all been ignored by the police. And you just think, why would a parent stop him getting in trouble? He didn't even get sent down for it. Why would they? Is it total denial? Is it like now? Is it just total denial against what you're seeing in front of your eyes?
When you get into researching these family bloodlines and these elite secret societies and stuff, you come to realize that the Illuminati, so-called, they traumatize their own kids. New generations of these families, they go through satanic ritual abuse and trauma-based mind control. It's just an accepted, given thing that they're going to go through it. And, it's to turn them into psychopaths. It's to destroy their innate humanity so that they can actually take on these roles, like what Johnson is doing now. And it makes me laugh that he decried the capital punishment in his school and said that he was appalled by it. Sorry, corporal punishment, I should say.
Yeah.
And yet now here he is holding the entire nation in collective punishment. And we haven't done anything wrong. But he has no problem with doing that. It's psychopathic traits.
It is. And we're not like him, though, are we? We're not the same as these people. These people
Clearly
have been bred for these positions. You see, the positions that his whole family, they're all journalists, they're all authors, they're all writing history, again, going back to what Chris was saying, but they're also all tortured. They're all at these schools getting battered by teachers, and some worse, sadly. Yeah. And so that builds them to be sadistic when they're in power. And that's why they can make decisions,
Those are traits that they actually want to cultivate.
Exactly. Yes.
They probably don't understand why we are like we are, like, well, why we're so soft.
I'll go back to, say, First World War. If you imagine, people say, well, how could generals just send men out over the top, be mown down in the thousands? Because they don't care. They aren't like them. They were taught at Sandhurst, like you said, or went to Eton and all these schools. We aren't like them. We're ants. If they're standing a few ants, they don't lose any sleep over it.
And you get an insight into the way they view us through some of the comments made by Margaret Sanger, who was one of the founders of Planned Parenthood, and Bill Gates' dad was one of the prominent founding members of that as well. And Sanger, you can find many quotes of hers online, but she just talks of regular working class people as useless weeds, useless breeders,
useless
that
eaters,
deserve to be, that need to be, exterminated. She actually puts this in her own words. That's the way they see us. That's the way Bill Gates sees us, because his old man entrained him in that way of thinking. That's why they can do what they do.
In all of this research, there's several things that keep coming back. One's sadistic abuse, whether it's physical, mental, or sexual. Next is eugenics. It's always a grain that runs straight through everything that we do, and the links back to Planned Parenthood or the Rockefellers, and all these elites is all the way through it. Carrie now is in number 10. She works for an NGO called Oceana, which is funded by the Rockefellers. Stanley worked directly for John D. Rockefeller III, came back and started writing books about population control.
Yep.
These just blatantly obvious links to this. And yet you can
wander around the virus that wipes people out in 1982.
Yeah. But then they go around the world saying we need to save whales and puffins and things like that.
It was actually called the Mandalay virus originally. Marburg virus. Had a picture of a monkey on the front of it.
Yeah.
But he re-released it as the virus when this kicked off to make a bit of extra cash out.
Yeah, very nice. So do you ever look at any Americans, or are you just sticking to Brits with this series?
No, we're going to look at, obviously, as you know, when you're doing research, it takes a long time, doesn't it? And you get a lot quicker as you're doing it. But the next people, I want to do probably a different change, maybe go a bit more international, probably. I wouldn't mind looking in some of these NGOs as well, charities. I started doing quite a lot of research on cancer research from a business aspect, looking at where they're putting their money, because they raise $700 million a year, cancer research. And they don't spend 700 million a year. And a lot of it goes into investments. It's held in stocks and shares in other companies and new technologies. So these people think they're putting a quid in a tin to help people. And in reality, they're just propping up the stock market. As you imagine, if you pulled one of those companies like 700 million away from the stock market, what would happen to the stock market overnight? And that's one company. I think there's 18,000 charities in Britain.
Never cured anything.
That have never cured anything.
One day we'll find a cure, honest.
Honest, yeah. Keep giving money and we'll find a cure.
I heard someone say as well that even the word cure is it's curing meat, so you're preserving it. You're preserving the charity, aren't you? You know what I mean? They're not curing anything.
Language, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, yeah. And by the very meaning of a charity, if it succeeds, the charity fails, doesn't it? As a proposition. Because if you get all the homeless off the streets, then we don't need shelter anymore. If you cure cancer, we don't need cancer research anymore.
That's right. The cancer industry judges its success by how many more people it's treating this year than last year. Yes. It's got no interest in curing them.
No.
Keeping them alive for a bit longer, making them comfortable while they slowly die. It's horrible.
Give people side effects and then raise money for them. And that's the formula that they're using.
Yeah.
And it's
thankfully
working.
More and more people are getting wise to this now, particularly those that have sadly lost family members to it and, starting to realise it could have been avoided. There's such things as natural cures, holistic cures that just don't get told about.
Well, even holistic management or, we use, one of the treatments we use is ozone therapies. And that is a huge treatment. You might not have heard of ozone therapies, but it's well used across Europe for over 100 years. It was a Tesla thing, if you believe the whole Tesla thing, but it was around that time when it was, came into being. And ozone is Earth's natural disinfectant, and it's there for a reason. And now you can have a machine that makes the ozone that you can do in various other treatments. And and there's other things as well. There's lots of other things that people can do. I mean, diet's the first thing, isn't it? But we're going off piste a little bit there.
Yeah. Well, just bringing it back to the Flockers series, you did a really long episode on Chris, Not So Witty. And, it came in much longer than the episode on Hancock because you really went to town on Whitty and you really uncovered some stuff about him, the Sith, as you call it. Yeah. So, what were some of the surprising things you uncovered about Chris Whitty?
Apart from lovely fella, eyes that stare straight through you.
I bet he's a hit with the ladies, that one.
Yeah, very well, yeah. Who's that with the beady eyes sat in the corner, staring at us?
It's E.T.
It's Whitty, yeah. And apart from he went to the same school as Alistair Crowley, he was another one that was dumped at an early age into these boarding schools. And for me, he's a prime example of what effect it can have on someone being dumped in a boarding school. And one of the main things for me was that his father was working for the UK British Council, it's called, which is like an arty type foundation, education foundation that has about £2 billion worth of funding. That some of it comes from people buying education from the British Council, and some of it's Foreign Office funding. So they work within the embassies and things like that. So he's obviously working for MI6, and he got shot in Greece. And they said it was because he'd recently bought a new car from an MI6 agent. That's why he was shot. And that was one of the standout pieces for me, which means he is linked back to the Foreign Office, MI6, and he has to have signed some sort of official Secrets Act to act in Cobra. He must have. So he's part of all that side of it as well. But the one thing that got me was that his grandma, or his great-grandma, his great-grandma, I think, she set up a Planned Parenthood type organisation in Ghana, which then turned into one of the head offices for Planned Parenthood International, which Stanley then worked for. Yeah, you see the links gaining pace here, and she set up. Exactly. She was part of the birth control in Ghana. This was going back into the 1920s, 1930s. That's how far back these things stretch. How far they've planned this eugenics movement goes back all that time. Yeah. And so Whitty's part of that. It's ingrained in him.
We looked into the Planned Parenthood thing, Don, where as soon as it was set up in America, he opened his wings and went straight to all the African countries. It was all African and South American countries. There wasn't one white country in there, was there?
No, Yeah, I mean, we sort of have a play about that. Is it in Switzerland? No, it's not in Switzerland. And then it's never going to be in any of these countries because they want to control probably where the natural resources are in the Asian and African and South American countries, so they can control all that. They don't want the mothership getting out of hand, do they?
That's why all these charities set up in Africa and all these places. That's why Bill Gates is always down there with Bono and all these.
Bono, he's just another clown, isn't he?
As soon as it has the word trust in it, there's a problem there.
Or foundation for most.
Yeah. Foundation, yeah, that's another one. And scheme, another scheme.
Yeah. And philanthropy.
Yeah, that's just one. Have you seen that? Is it The Giving? What's it called, Chris? The Giving, where all these billionaires have got together and they're on about trust? Giving away. Yeah, the Giving Trust or something. They're giving away half of their money when they die to this philanthropy, and you just know that's not true. I mean, Bill Gates, the Gates Foundation, Warren Buffett invests that money, and Cascade is the investment company. He invests that money into stocks and shares like pharmaceutical companies, and then the profits that makes, that's what he gives as grants back to pharmaceutical companies or to operations like the World Health Organization that then making more money on stocks and shares. It's just this cycle that goes round, and it's so blatantly obvious.
I was saying to Dom a while ago that it's funny that they drag out Bill Gates and he talks about we're going to put this many billions in here, we're going to put this many billions in there. And unfortunately, I think that he's using the fact that everyone has been trained and programmed to admire millionaires with billions of pounds. And he talks about it so, and then to your average Joe, like, it just confuses you. You're like, well, he's got all that money. He must know what he's doing. He's here to save us. But we've been taught for years now to respect people who've just got loads of money. No matter what their opinion is or what they're doing, just respect that.
Especially if they wear a nice salmon pink sweater.
Oh, it's lovely, that, isn't it? His grandma must have made it him.
Can always trust a man in a sweater.
He just freaks me out the way he talks with his little weaselly, nasally voice, whispering his arms around. Ugh, horrible.
Exactly. I mean, like Kermit the Frog.
Yeah, he's like Kermit the Frog. You're right there. Corbett Report did a really good expose on his stuff, but nobody's really done a deep dive on his past, have the family and all that type of stuff. That might be a good place to start with somebody who's in America. Well,
just the fact that he is where he is. They always use the fact that he started in a garage. Why do they have to use a garage all the time? We know that's nonsense to start with, don't we?
What, the same time
like
as
Mark Zuckerberg supposedly started Facebook in his college dorm. I'm sure we're all convinced by that story.
Yeah. They made a film about it, so it's true.
Well, I was going to say, if they've had to make a high-budget Hollywood film out of it, it's definitely true.
Yeah. I mean, how many films after a business has been set up were made 2 or 3 years after it actually was set up? None. Absolutely none. It's all to grow this illusion of this business growing really quick, isn't it?
I'd like personally, Mark, I'd like to do, because I'm a big film fan, or I used to be until I started seeing all the programming in it. But I'd like to do some dives into maybe some directors or actors as well. That's something I'd be interested in.
Well, like I say, you're now the Meet the Flockers guys, so people are going to want you to do this for the rest of your natural lives.
The poison chalice, yeah. But it's quite interesting, really, because, I mean, from a personal point of view, I've wanted to do this for a long time, but with having what we had Lyme disease-wise, my health wasn't good enough to do the amount of stress that it takes. And so now it feels, because we've been building up to it and watching you guys do it, it feels so natural to do it now, which is... it's a bit strange, really. It's like what we do now, isn't it, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, like, Dom's a bit more natural at it than I am, I think.
One question I've wanted to ask you the whole show is, out of all the stuff that you've uncovered about these individuals then, what is the one thing that shocked you the most, genuinely shocked you? Anything spring to mind?
There's a lot of stuff spring to mind. Let Chris answer it first.
I'm just thinking. Well, just off the top of my head, what's the one we did last night? The Carrie Simmons one. Well, whether this is, I don't know if this is part of anything, but when she was at college, she did.
You'll like this, Mark. Yeah.
She did a play, an Aleister Crowley-based play. What was it? Dom? Cocaine. I'm not going to say it. C-U-N-T and cognac. And I immediately recognised that as an Aleister Crowley quote, and it's one of his poems. But then there's pictures of her and this other guy all daubed up with triple six on them and pentagons and stuff like that. Now, it's also possible she was just trying to be an edgy student, but it just seemed a bit weird. That's what I'd say.
Sounds like a night in the House of Commons bar.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but when you see what she's dressed as, and you'll see what we mean. Now, like Chris says, she's an actress. She got a degree in theatre studies, did Carrie. So I mean that tells you everything to start with, doesn't it? She's an actress.
When you see her projection through working life is probably even faster and swifter than Boris Johnson's, isn't it, Don?
Yeah, well, she leaves university and becomes the PR guru for the Conservative Party at 21, advising MPs. That's just nonsense. I'm sorry, but that's nonsense. That's not the real world. Nobody I know gets a job like that when they leave university. No one.
And just a quick Google I did yesterday before we did it. She'd been mentioned like every 5 or 10 hours in the news. You know, these news things came up 5 hours ago, 10 hours ago, 1 day ago. So she's constantly mentioned in the news to keep her as this person. I don't know what they've got planned for her, what she's going to do next, but it just seems like she got lined up and she's still getting lined up for something that's coming next.
Yeah, well, there's a Tatler. She's on the front page of Tatler, and you know that when you're in their ilk, if you like, and you're on the front page of Tatler, you've arrived, and it says Carrie's coup, the most powerful woman in Britain, or something like that. It says on the front of the magazine. Why is she powerful? What has she done? You know?
And that group did an investigation into her background to see if she were actually running number 10.
Yeah, that was a parliamentary group as well, wasn't it? Weren't a lot of Conservatives did it? To see if she had an influence in the. Why would they do that on a
too much influence?
Yeah, why would she?
That's on the wallpaper and the carpets and the curtains.
Yeah, I don't think it's just that, is it? I don't think it's
probably
ironing his undies that he puts on his head. For me, one of the standout ones. I've got to say, well, the one that freaked me out was the one that we went into last night, Chris. And I think were you an ex-cabbie, Mark? Am I right?
Yeah, private hire driver.
Yeah. Well, can you remember John Warboys?
The name rings a bell.
He was the black cab attacker. He was drugging women in the cab, apparently.
I remember that. I was living in London at the time. That's why
he got sent down for 2 life sentences. Apparently, Carrie was one of his victims.
That is a weird one. That is a weird one.
What were the chances?
What the chances of her leaving school, becoming PR manager for Conservatives, then getting into his cab and becoming number 10, but living in number 10? I think pretty high.
Reminds me of a story that came up in my music industry research involving Debbie Harry, exactly.
Yeah.
She claims to have been a victim of Ted, or a potential victim of Ted Bundy. She tells the story that in New York one time she got into Ted Bundy's car, doesn't really explain why, and then he started acting really strange, and then she noticed there were no door handles on the inside of the car, but somehow she managed to get out. So what were the chances of, an extremely popular and well-known singer just happening to fall into the clutches of a serial killer? And we've got the same. We got the same thing happening here with the bloody wife of the Prime Minister.
I didn't actually mention that yesterday, Mark, when we did the videos. I remember thinking about Debbie Harry.
Yeah.
And when you hear the explanation, when I've read the other accounts, they were quite nailed on. Her explanation was, "I'm 99.9% sure he never touched me." So why are you in court then saying he did?
Well, it's that 0.01%. It makes all the difference, as we know from COVID.
I think that's even less than that, isn't it? It's 0.006%, which is even more
weird.
Yeah.
It probably is.
I think that was just to get her name again just mentioned in the news, so she's got some history. So you can, but bizarre. There's so many inconsistencies to that story as well.
I mean, there's another one, and it's in the next film after this. So I'm giving the scripts away, but anyway, there's a guy who's taken over Dominic Cummings' position, and he's been in the sort of number 10 before during I think it was during a Labour government with Blair and the other clown Brown, and also in Cameron's government. So he's jumped ship to different parties. It's not a party thing. He's now advisor. He's called Dan Rosenfeld, and he's the chairman of, I think it's called the Jewish Society, and also he worked as a consultant for a company called Hackett. And Hackett is spelt strange. It's like a Greek spelling, Hy something other. And that is run by an ex-SAS, sort of like a I think he was a colonel and an MI6 agent, and it employs ex-people like that to go around the world advising on security, wherever that means. And he was part of that operation, and he's now in number 10 advising. If anything freaked me out, that probably did more than anything, to be honest with you, because that just showed that they got rid of Cummins, and I'm not saying he were a nice guy, because he was a eugenicist as well, but they got rid of him because they needed to control Boris more. So they put their man in, because their man worked for the Bank of America, Dan Rosenfeld. He was director there as well. And that's owned, believe it or not, you can't write this stuff. I think it's 11% of Bank of America is owned by Warren Buffett, who looks after Bill Gates' money. So now they've got a man in number 10.
Let me ask you about, through your research, did you find much evidence of what appears to be arranged marriages, arranged relationships? Did you get the impression that a lot of these people are kind of put together? It's families marrying into other families. Did you find any of that?
Yes, I did. With Stanley's first wife, I thought that was like an arranged type of marriage. I mean, the poor girl was... it's sort of like accepted that he broke her nose.
When we went through that, Dom, I think we even mentioned that, Mark, in one of the videos, but all you felt for her was sympathy. I just felt bad for her. That's the overlining feeling I got.
She had 4 kids and then basically dumped into a mental asylum. And that is, I suppose, if you're going back to these arranged satanic type marriages, that looks like that to me, because they were put together. If you look at the backdrop of where they come from, they're all like Stanley's backdrop was the Turkish side and the German Pfeffels, and her side was royal bloodlines and things like that. And together, you could see why now Boris has been sort of chosen. When you see the bloodlines with them two together, and then Stanley, it just sounded like he abused her to me. And it was like she was chosen as a breeding mare, like you would a racehorse.
I think that's what Princess Di said as well, isn't it?
Yeah, that's what it looked like to me. And if you see the poor woman, why on earth would she had everything she needed, and yet she suffered from so many anxieties, and it looks like she was diagnosed with Parkinson's at 40-year-old. At 32, she went into the Maudsley, obviously had some sort of drug treatment and probably electric shocks, because they were prevalent in the 70s. And that treatment, they put up to 450 volts in your head. It's and you don't have to. You can't say no to it. They just wheel you in, drug you and wheel you in.
What was that quote from Boris's wife? It was something along the lines of, "As marriage ended the day we got married," or something. Was it?
Yeah, there you go. That doesn't explain it. Yeah.
Yeah, that again smelled of an arrangement to me.
That was Boris's first wife. Allegra. Our marriage ended the day we got married.
And even looking at his the woman we were talking about, Carrie Simon, that looks like an arrangement to me. They don't. I mean, when you see them talking together, they don't look together. They don't look like they're a couple to me.
A lot of girls in your school called Allegra, weren't there?
Yeah, loads of them. Yeah, you like that one, didn't you? They didn't have any in Huddersfield called Allegra.
Exactly. Didn't even have any in Oxford, mate.
Yeah.
I commend you for remaining journalistic in your approach through all this and professional, since I don't think I could stand to wallow in the filth and the depravity of the lives of these abominations for so long. I just feel like going and taking a shower whenever I delve into this stuff. So you do a great job with it. Who have you got coming up in the series? And do you want to remind people where they can go to catch the whole of the Meet the Flockers series and whatever else you're doing with Sheep Farm Studios as well?
Yeah, well, we just finished design on a website. It's a quick and flimsy thing to get us going. I want to host all our films and podcasts and things like that on there, because obviously the YouTube stars ain't going to last forever, sadly, whether we like it or not. And I think the other media places will be on borrowed time at some point as well. But so we want to host our own things. We've got a good podcast coming up with a guy next week, haven't we, Chris? We're actually doing the opposite to what we're doing now. We're interviewing him, or hopefully sitting and listening to him. And he's an American chap. And I don't really want to give the game away, but I'll tell you offline, Mark. We want to get a little bit more into that to supplement what we do as well. Find people that maybe aren't when I say mainstream, people like us who are just new or nobody's really heard of as well, on a podcast that got interesting things to say, which is difficult to find, I suppose. Who's next on the list? It's a good question, that, because we keep firing names over. I didn't want to do Boris, and we've ended up doing 4 features on this freak. So who do you think's next, Chris?
I think it could be a charity, couldn't it? We keep skirting around that, though.
Yeah, we keep skirting around a couple of charities just to do something slightly different and dig deep and just show people that when you lift the veil off these things or people or entities, that it's something else. It's not what you think it is. And
anyone you'd like to see, Matt?
Well, it'd be good to do one on Anthony Fauci, wouldn't it?
Well, yeah. I did start doing one on him, ironically, and there's so much stuff on him. I don't know if you've heard of
connections to the mob in there.
Well, there's a lot, connections, best certainly to big pharmaceutical companies in there, and I don't know if you've heard the guy who invented the PCR test, haven't you? Kerry Mullis.
Kerry Mullis.
Have you heard his interview where he's sort of slagging Fauci off?
Not heard that one, no. I've heard about it.
Because he was part of the AIDS shenanigans, weren't he?
That's right,
The make-believe
he's got previous.
He's got previous. And Kerry Mullis, obviously, people who don't know, he invented the PCR test, won a Nobel laureate prize for it. And somebody had found that HIV through his testing. He thought, oh, who's done that? Fantastic, I'll take some credit on this one. And no one has ever taken credit for finding that. And before he died, he was saying that people who found that would have earned it would have been their career, tens of millions of dollars out of that, just from admitting that. So it's a bit like the internet giving it away for free, isn't it?
Your YouTube address?
It's just at Sheep Farm Studios.
All right, Dom, Chris, thanks for coming on today.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us on, Matt.
This is just for fun.
I'm picking up vibrations. I'm picking up